Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're taking a deep dive into psychic cold reading.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. We're using an audiobook called Handbook of Psychic Cold Reading by Dantalion Jones.
Okay.
And we're going to see what we can learn. What are the strategies?
Yeah.
How effective are the techniques?
You said secrets.
Yeah.
That's a great word because, cold reading is often about creating that air of mystery and hidden knowledge.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because Dantalion Jones in this book, he comes at this topic from more of an entertainment perspective.
Okay.
So he really stresses the performance aspect of cold reading rather than claiming to have like genuine psychic abilities.
Gotcha. So it's kind of like a magic show
Yeah.
more than a mystical experience.
Exactly. He makes it clear that he's not out to, debunk anyone who believes in psychic phenomena.
Sure.
He just wants to provide a framework for understanding the mechanics of cold reading as a performance art.
I gotcha. So before we get into the techniques and all that, let's define what cold reading actually is.
Yeah.
How does Dantalion Jones describe it in his book?
He defines it as basically a combination of generalized statements, keen observation, and just a little touch of guile to give the impression that you have psychic powers.
Okay, so you're creating this illusion.
Yeah.
It's like a carefully constructed performance to make people believe that you have insights that you may not actually have.
Precisely. It's kind of like, think of a stage magician
Right.
who uses sleight of hand, misdirection to create these illusions.
Right.
And cold reading operates in a similar way,
Right.
but using psychological techniques instead.
And he suggests that anyone can learn these techniques.
Yeah.
So it's not like an innate psychic ability
Right.
that only a select few have.
Exactly. He provides lots of examples of how he's used cold reading for entertainment. At parties, corporate events, even fundraisers. So it's more of a learned skill set
Right.
than like a supernatural gift.
So I'm curious about the people who use cold reading professionally.
Mm-hmm.
Do they all claim to have these genuine psychic abilities? Or are some of them upfront about the fact that it's just a performance?
Well, it depends.
Okay.
Some cold readers really fully embrace that entertainment aspect.
Right.
And they're totally transparent about the techniques they use.
Okay.
But then others kind of blur those lines and they present themselves as having, real psychic abilities.
Yeah.
And that's where the ethical considerations come into play.
Right. We'll talk about that later.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's important to distinguish between, those who are using it responsibly for entertainment
Right.
versus those who might be exploiting people.
Absolutely. But for now, let's delve deeper into some of the techniques themselves.
Okay.
One of the key things Jones highlights is the importance of having a compelling backstory as a cold reader.
Like a persona.
To add to the mystique and the credibility.
Exactly. Yeah, he gives examples like, they might say they learned their skills from their wise grandmother.
Right.
Or they had this sudden awakening of psychic powers after, some big life event.
So they're really setting the stage, creating that atmosphere of mystery and intrigue.
Exactly. You're building a foundation of belief before you even say anything.
That makes sense. Now, I remember reading about Ray Hyman, a psychologist, who developed these 13 rules for cold reading.
Yes.
Does Jones touch on any of those?
He does. And, he highlights a few that are particularly interesting. Like, for example, rule number 1.
Okay.
Emphasizes projecting confidence.
Right.
Even if you're just totally making it up.
Even if you have no idea what you're talking about.
Exactly. So it's not just what you say, it's how you say it.
Right. So confidence can be just as persuasive as accuracy.
Absolutely. Confidence creates that sense of authority.
Right.
And then people are more likely to believe you, even if there's nothing to it.
Okay, so it's like fake it till you make it, but in the psychic realm.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then, rule number 2 encourages cold readers to use statistics and demographics to make guesses about their subjects.
Ah, so it's not all random. There's some strategy involved.
Exactly. Yeah. By understanding basic probabilities and social norms, they can make statements that resonate with people.
Because it, aligns with their expectations.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's like playing the odds. But instead of betting on numbers, you're betting on human nature.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Another rule that Jones talks about is using props, like tarot cards or crystal balls.
Yeah, like the tools of the trade.
Exactly.
Do they, is there a purpose for those?
Yeah. Rule number 5 actually addresses that.
Okay.
And Jones explains that props serve 2 purposes.
Okay.
First of all, they create that visual spectacle.
Right, it's like part of the show.
Exactly. But they also kind of buy the reader time to observe their subject and to gather their thoughts.
Okay, so it's kind of like, it's like a distraction.
Yeah, yeah. Like a magician using a flashy gesture to distract you while they're setting up the next trick.
Gotcha.
It's a way to kind of control the flow.
Okay. And what about the language used in cold reading?
Yeah.
Is there like a specific vocabulary or style?
Rule number 7 talks about that.
Okay.
And it suggests that they use kind of stock phrases from astrology.
Right.
You know, fortune-telling manuals. Things that sound profound, but are actually vague enough to apply to lots of people.
Okay. So they're leaving it open to interpretation.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's creating that ambiguity that allows the person to kind of project their own meaning onto it.
And that's where the Barnum effect comes in.
Exactly.
Right.
Which we'll get to later.
Yeah. So there's a lot more psychology involved than I thought.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
a lot of psychology.
it's not just like randomly throwing out predictions.
Right.
It's about understanding how people process information
Yeah.
and how to use language to shape their perceptions.
Exactly. You know, Jones also highlights the importance of dramatizing the reading,
Right.
which is rule number 10. And he talks about how they use vivid language, storytelling, emotional appeals to make even small things seem significant.
Yeah. So they're creating an experience.
Yeah.
Like it's not just, you know, here's a reading. It's like, I'm going to draw you in
Exactly.
to this narrative.
And make it a performance.
Right. Okay. Now, beyond these general rules,
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about the specific techniques that cold readers use to gather information about their subjects. Like, how do they get those aha moments that make it seem like they actually have those psychic abilities?
Right. And that's where the observational skills really come into play.
Okay.
You know, Jones spends a good chunk of the book talking about how they use subtle cues and tells and generalizations to create the illusion of deep insight.
Okay, tell me more about these tells. What are they looking for?
You know, they're paying attention to everything. Appearance, body language, their choice of words, tone of voice.
So like a detective
Yeah.
piecing together clues?
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. They'll notice things like if someone's wearing a watch on their right wrist, which could mean that they're left-handed.
Oh, wow.
Or, you know, if they've got scratches on their lower back, maybe they're a cat owner.
That's fascinating. It's amazing what you can pick up on.
It is. It is. And, you know, they also use generalizations
Okay.
about specific demographics,
Right.
like redheads, you know, or attractive women,
Right.
to make these statements that seem personalized.
But they're really based on stereotypes.
Right, exactly.
So they're just playing the odds
Yeah.
that certain traits are more common in certain groups.
Right. And while that can be effective, you know,
Right.
in creating a sense of relatability, it can also, you know, perpetuate those harmful biases.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even these seemingly harmless techniques can have unintended consequences.
Absolutely. And Jones introduces a technique called half and half,
Okay.
which is really kind of clever.
I'm intrigued. What's that?
Basically, you state a quality
Uh-huh.
and then its opposite,
Oh, there you
so
go.
that no matter what, the person will relate to at least one part of it.
Ah, so you're kind of hedging your bets.
Exactly, yeah. So, you know, like they might say you're generally a very confident person, but there are times when you doubt yourself.
Right.
So no matter what their actual confidence level is, they're likely to feel like, oh, yeah, he's got me figured out.
That's clever.
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder how much of what we perceive as psychic insight is really just this manipulation of language and psychology.
That's the heart of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Dantalion Jones isn't the only one who's written about this.
Right.
You know, another guy named Ian Rowland wrote a book called The Full Facts Book of Cold Reading.
Oh, I've heard of that one. That's like the Bible for cold readers, right?
Yeah, it is. It's really comprehensive. He breaks down the techniques into all these different elements,
Good.
each with its own little strategies and psychological underpinnings.
Okay, well, I'm ready to dive into Roland's world.
Okay.
What are some of the key elements that he talks about?
Well, one that really jumps out is called the rainbow ruse.
Okay.
And it's kind of like that half and half technique that we just talked about,
Right.
where you're attributing, you know, both a quality and its opposite
Right.
to the person. So they're bound to identify with at least one aspect of it.
Right. So, again, playing the odds.
Exactly.
Okay.
So they might say something like, You're generally a very outgoing person, but there are times when you prefer to be alone with your thoughts.
Right, so they're appealing to our desire to be seen as, complex individuals.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And that validation makes us more likely to trust them.
Right. Now, I do want to get into the ethics of all of this. Yeah.
Because it does sound like there's potential for manipulation.
Right.
Does Roland address that at all in his book?
He does touch upon it, emphasizing the importance of using cold reading responsibly and ethically.
Right.
But I think that's something that we definitely need to dive into deeper.
Yeah, for sure.
As we continue on.
That's probably a good place to pause for now.
Okay.
I'm already, I gotta process all this.
We covered a lot.
Yeah.
But this is just the beginning.
Yeah.
We'll get into even more techniques.
Okay.
And we'll explore the psychology. That makes cold reading so effective.
Okay.
And we'll get into those ethical considerations.
All right. Sounds good. So until next time, stay tuned.
Yeah.
And we'll uncover even more secrets of psychic cold reading.
It's going to be fun.
Yeah. Welcome back. I'm still thinking about all those cold reading techniques we talked about last time.
Yeah.
It's amazing how these seemingly simple tricks can create such powerful illusions.
It's true. And we're just getting started. We're going to explore even more fascinating techniques.
Okay.
Some that might even seem a little unsettling.
I'm ready.
All right. So Dantalion Jones gets into some advanced methods that really blur the lines between performance and manipulation.
Okay, I'm ready for it. What's next on our journey into the world of psychic deception?
Okay. Well, one technique that's really interesting is called eye-accessing cues. It's based on the idea that the direction a person's eyes move can actually reveal how they're processing information.
Wait, so you mean if someone looks up and to the right, they're remembering something visually?
Exactly.
Okay.
And if they look up and to the left, they're constructing an image in their mind.
Wow.
And so cold readers can use those cues to tailor their statements, to make it seem like they're reading the person's mind.
Okay, so if I asked you, to remember your favorite childhood toy, and your eyes dart up and to the right, I could say, I sense you're picturing something from your past, something that brought you joy as a child.
Exactly.
Wow.
And by aligning their statements with the person's internal thought processes, they create this really powerful illusion of insight.
It's like mental espionage or something.
Yeah.
Are there any other techniques like that where they're using these subtle nonverbal cues?
Yeah. Jones also talks about Hellstromism, which is a mentalism technique for locating hidden objects.
Oh.
And again, it's not about genuine psychic ability. It's about interpreting signals from the person who hid the object.
So it's like hide and seek, but with a psychic twist.
Yeah, yeah.
Where they're looking for those subtle tells.
Right. The reader will often hold the wrist of the person who hid the object.
Okay.
And claim they're picking up on their energy, vibrations.
Right.
But in reality, they're paying attention to tiny muscle twitches, changes in breathing, even slight shifts in body weight.
Oh, wow.
To find that object.
That's amazing. It's really amazing how these techniques can exploit our unconscious behaviors.
Yeah.
To make it seem like they have psychic powers. It is. Now, with all this talk of manipulation and deception, I think it's really important to talk about the ethics of cold reading.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dantalion Jones makes it clear in the book that the techniques he's describing are for entertainment purposes only.
Right.
And he really cautions against using them to exploit people.
Yeah, he does.
Or manipulate them for personal gain.
It's like a magician revealing how a trick is done.
Right.
The knowledge is cool, but you got to use it responsibly.
Yeah, exactly. There's a big difference between entertaining people with an illusion.
Right.
And preying on vulnerable people who are looking for genuine guidance.
Absolutely.
So where do we draw the line between harmless entertainment and potentially harmful exploitation? What are some of the ethical concerns that we should be aware of?
Well, I think one of the biggest worries is financial exploitation.
Okay.
Somebody could use these techniques to convince people to pay a lot of money for readings.
Yeah.
That give false hope or empty promises.
Yeah. It's easy to see how that could happen, especially if someone is really desperate for answers or guidance.
Exactly. They're more likely to believe anything.
Yeah.
That sounds promising. And that's where critical thinking comes in.
Right.
Got to remember, nobody has all the answers.
Right.
And anyone who claims to have absolute knowledge or power, should be approached with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Yeah. So trust your own judgment. Don't blindly accept everything you hear,
Right.
especially when it comes to personal matters.
Exactly. And beyond financial exploitation, there's also emotional manipulation.
Oh, okay.
You know, these techniques could be used to gain control over people's lives,
Right.
to influence their decisions,
Yeah.
their relationships.
It's almost like brainwashing in a way, right? Like planting those seeds of doubt or suggestion.
Yeah, that's a strong word.
Yeah.
But it illustrates the potential for harm.
Right.
Genuine guidance should come from a place of empathy and respect, not manipulation and control.
Exactly. So how can we protect ourselves from falling prey to these tactics?
Well, I think the best defense is knowledge
Okay.
and awareness. By understanding how cold reading works, you're better equipped to spot those red flags.
Right. So it's like having that knowledge is like a decoder ring.
Yeah.
It helps you see through the illusion
Exactly.
and understand the game.
And trust your intuition.
Yeah.
If something feels off or too good to be true, it probably is.
Right. Now, shifting gears a little bit,
Okay.
I want to talk about this other interesting concept that Jones talks about in the book, the 7 hidden addictions.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so these aren't your typical addictions
Right.
like drugs or gambling.
Right. Not substance abuse or anything like that.
Yeah. But they're more like deep-seated psychological needs that can make us vulnerable to manipulation.
Exactly.
Okay. So what are these 7 hidden addictions?
Mm-hmm.
And how do they tie into cold reading?
Okay, so Jones describes these 7 core addictions. Addiction to certainty, feeling important, being right, feeling safe and secure, hope, variety, and the scapegoat.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
Let's start with the addiction to certainty.
Okay.
How does that play into our susceptibility to cold reading?
Well, as humans, we crave a sense of predictability and control.
Right.
We want to know what to expect.
Sure.
And cold readers exploit that need by offering seemingly definitive answers and predictions.
Right, so they're creating a sense of certainty
Exactly.
in an uncertain world.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like a psychological safety net.
Yeah, it's like they're giving us a sense of order and security.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
What about the addiction to feeling important? How does that factor in?
Well, this one's all about the need for recognition and validation.
Right.
We all want to feel valued, respected, admired.
Sure.
And cold readers tap into that by flattering their subjects.
Right.
Making them feel special, unique.
Right, so they're basically stroking our egos
Yeah. Yeah, you could say that.
so that we're more receptive to their message.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And what about the addiction to being right? How does that play into all this?
Well, you know, we tend to cling to our beliefs,
Yeah.
even when we're presented with evidence to the contrary.
Right.
And cold readers take advantage of that.
Okay.
They phrase their statements in a way that confirms our existing beliefs and biases.
Right, so it makes us feel smart, like we got it all figured out.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, the addiction to hope,
Mm-hmm.
that's one I think we can all relate to,
Yeah,
especially during tough times.
absolutely.
So how do they exploit that?
Well, when we're facing challenges or uncertainty about the future,
Yeah.
we hold on to hope,
Right,
like a lifeline.
right.
And cold readers offer optimistic predictions, promises of better days.
So it's like they're selling us a commodity that we're desperate for.
Yeah, you could say that.
It's a glimmer of hope
Exactly.
in a dark time.
Exactly. And it gives people a reason to keep going.
Right. Okay, so what about this addiction to variety? How does that tie into cold reading?
Well, you know, we're curious creatures.
That's
We
right.
like new experiences, new information.
Right.
And cold readers exploit that by offering a wide range of insights and predictions.
Okay, so it's like a mental buffet.
Yeah, a little bit of everything
Yeah.
to keep you interested.
Yeah. All right, and then we've got the last one, the addiction to the scapegoat.
Yeah.
This one seems kind of heavy.
It is a bit heavier. You know, when things go wrong,
Yeah.
you want to find someone or something to blame.
Right.
And cold readers offer external explanations for our problems.
Okay.
So they shift the blame away from ourselves.
Right. So they're giving us a way to avoid responsibility.
Yeah. It's a way to protect our egos,
So,
but it can also keep us from facing our own shortcomings.
right. That's really interesting. It's amazing how deeply these needs can influence us
It is. It is.
and make us vulnerable to these tactics.
Exactly. And by understanding these hidden addictions,
Right.
we can become more aware of our own vulnerabilities
Right.
and make better choices about who we trust.
So Jones's exploration of the 7 hidden addictions really adds a whole new layer of complexity to cold reading.
Yeah. It does.
It's not just about tricks and techniques. It's about understanding these deep-seated needs.
Absolutely. It's really fascinating.
It's like where psychology, performance, and this human desire for meaning all intersect.
Yeah. It's really interesting to see how those things come together.
Now, I'm curious about numerology.
Okay.
That's a system that a lot of cold readers use, right?
Sure, yeah.
Does Jones cover that in the book?
He does. Numerology is really popular with cold readers.
Okay.
Because it provides a system for generating interpretations.
Okay.
Based on numbers from your birth date.
Okay, so like it's assigning meaning to numbers.
Yeah.
And using those meanings to create a personalized reading.
Exactly. And a big part of numerology is this thing called the soul path number.
Okay.
Which is calculated from your birth date, and it's supposed to reveal your core personality traits.
Okay. So let's look at the soul path number.
All right.
And how cold readers use it.
Okay.
I'm curious to see if there's anything to it.
Well, it's important to remember that numerology, like astrology, isn't scientifically validated.
Right.
It's a system of beliefs and interpretations.
Right.
But that doesn't mean it's without merit. A lot of people find meaning in these systems.
Yeah.
And cold readers are really good at using them.
Right.
To create that sense of personalization.
Right. So even if the system itself isn't based on hard science, the way it's presented can still have a powerful psychological effect.
Absolutely. It's the way they weave it all together.
Right.
You know, the beliefs, the suggestion, the observation.
Yeah.
That makes cold reading so effective.
All right, let's look at some specific examples of soul path numbers and their interpretations.
Okay.
I'm curious to see what these personality profiles look like.
All right. Well, let's start with soul path number 1. This number is all about independence, leadership, a pioneering spirit.
Okay.
People with this number are often described as ambitious, driven.
So they're the trailblazers.
Yeah.
The go-getters.
Exactly.
Okay.
They have that natural charisma,
Right.
strong sense of self,
Okay.
which can make them very persuasive.
Okay. And what about, let's contrast that with soul path number 2,
Okay.
which is associated with cooperation, diplomacy, harmony.
Right. These folks are often described as peacemakers, mediators,
Okay.
you know, sensitive souls. They
Yeah.
really value connection,
Okay.
and they thrive in collaborative environments.
So they're the diplomats, the team players.
Exactly. Yeah. They have a real gift for empathy,
Right.
deep understanding of human emotions.
Makes sense. This is really interesting. It's amazing how a simple number can be used to create these detailed personality profiles.
It is. And cold readers are really good at incorporating those into their readings.
Right.
You know, creating that personalized insight.
Okay. Now, before we get too carried away with numerology,
Right.
we should remember that these are just interpretations, not facts.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. You got to take these systems with a grain of salt.
Right.
Don't let them define you.
Exactly. So it's fun to explore,
Yeah.
but we shouldn't take it too literally.
Exactly. We're all unique individuals
Right.
with our own paths to follow.
Okay. Now, I know a lot of cold readers also use astrology.
Yeah.
Does Jones talk about that as well?
He does. He does. Astrology's got all this rich symbolism and ancient wisdom.
Yeah.
So it provides a lot of material for cold readers.
Right. So it's like numerology, but instead of numbers, they're using the positions of the stars and planets
Exactly.
to interpret personality
Right.
and predict the future.
And again, just like numerology, it's not scientifically validated,
Right.
but a lot of people find meaning in it.
Sure.
And cold readers are really good at using it to create that sense of personalized insight.
Yeah. Right. So even if we don't believe in astrology literally, the way it's presented can still have that impact on us.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I'm curious to explore some specific examples of astrological signs and their personality traits.
Okay.
Like, what are some of the common interpretations?
All right. Well, let's start with Aries,
Okay.
the first sign of the zodiac.
Okay.
Aries is a fire sign known for its energy and enthusiasm,
Okay.
pioneering spirit.
So the trailblazers.
Yeah.
The go-getters.
They're often described as courageous, confident, independent.
Okay, and let's contrast that with Taurus, the second sign,
Okay.
which is an earth sign.
Yeah.
More grounded, practical,
Right.
sexual.
Yeah. Taurians are often described as reliable, patient, loyal.
Okay.
They love comfort, beauty.
So they're the builders, the creators,
Exact.
the ones who appreciate stability.
Yeah. They're very connected to the physical world.
Right. It's fascinating how these interpretations can really capture these different personality types.
Yeah. It is. It's really interesting.
And again, we should remember that these are just interpretations.
Right.
not set in stone.
Exactly.
So it's fun to explore, but
Yeah.
don't let them define you.
Yeah. You're more than just your sun sign.
Right. Wow, this has been quite a journey.
It has.
We've really gone deep into the world of cold reading.
Yeah.
We've explored the basic techniques,
Mm-hmm.
the advanced methods, the psychology.
And we've still got more to uncover.
Okay.
In the next part of our dive, we're going to explore this really interesting phenomenon that makes cold readings so believable.
Okay.
And we'll leave you with some final thoughts
All right.
to consider as you navigate this world.
So until next time,
Yeah.
keep those critical thinking skills sharp.
Right.
We'll be back soon to wrap it all up.
It's going to be good.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've spent the last 2 parts of this episode really getting into this world of psychic cold reading.
Yeah.
It's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it is.
And a little unsettling sometimes.
Right.
We've learned a lot about the techniques and strategies they use,
Yeah, it's amazing.
and even some of the psychological tricks they use,
Right.
and how we can be vulnerable to those.
Exactly.
And we even got into numerology and astrology,
Mm-hmm.
how those systems can be used to create a sense of personalized insight,
Yeah.
even though they might not be scientifically validated.
Right. They're not exactly scientific.
No, not really.
But they can still be pretty powerful tools
Yeah.
when used in the right way.
Now, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to go back to the 4 effect.
Okay.
You mentioned earlier that it plays a big role in making cold readings believable.
It really does. The 4 effect, sometimes called the Barnum effect.
Okay.
It explains why people are so willing to accept these vague, general personality descriptions
Right.
as if they were unique to them.
Right. It's like those personality quizzes online where they give you the same, generic result no matter what you answer.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
The classic example is this experiment done by a psychologist named Bertram Forer back in 1948.
Okay.
He gave his students a personality test,
Mm.
and then he gave them all the exact same analysis,
Wow.
saying it was tailored to their individual responses,
Okay.
but it was just like general statements.
Right.
Like, you have a great need for other people to like and admire you.
Yeah. Or you're sometimes insecure, but you try to hide it.
Yeah, exactly. Things like that.
Okay.
That could apply to almost anyone.
Right.
But most of the students rated the analysis as very accurate.
Wow, really? Even though they all got the same one.
Yeah,
So it's like our brains are looking for patterns.
Right.
They want to find meaning,
Exactly.
even when it's not really there.
We tend to fill in the gaps.
Right.
Project our own experiences and beliefs onto these vague statements.
And make them seem more meaningful.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
cold readers are really good at using this
Right.
to their advantage.
Okay.
They use vague language, open-ended questions, statements that can be interpreted in many ways.
Okay.
So people end up projecting their own meaning.
Right. So it's like they're holding up a mirror,
Yeah.
but it's a distorted mirror.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to put it.
Right. It shows us what we want to see,
Right.
not necessarily the truth.
Exactly.
And that's why it's so important to be aware of this,
Mm-hmm.
to approach these readings with a critical eye.
Absolutely.
Don't just believe everything you hear,
Right.
especially when it comes to these matters of personal significance.
Right. Because these readings could be playing on our desires,
Yeah.
our need to believe, our need to find meaning.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with seeking guidance,
Right.
wanting to find meaning.
Exactly.
But it's important to do it with awareness,
Mm-hmm.
to be careful about who you trust.
Absolutely.
Now, before we finish up here,
Okay.
Dantalion Jones stresses the importance of using cold reading ethically.
Yeah, he's very clear about that.
Yeah. He says the techniques should only be used for entertainment,
Right.
never to manipulate or exploit anyone.
It's like a magician showing you how a trick is done.
Yeah.
It's cool to know the secret, but
Right.
you should use it to create wonder, not to hurt people.
Exactly.
Ah,
So as we conclude this deep dive into cold reading, I think the key takeaway is knowledge is power.
absolutely.
Understanding the techniques
Mm-hmm.
and the psychology
Yeah.
makes us more savvy consumers of information.
Right. We can see through the smoke and mirrors
Exactly.
and make our own informed decisions.
So if you ever come across somebody claiming to have psychic powers, remember what we've talked about today.
Mm-hmm.
Observe their techniques.
Right.
See if you can spot any of these things.
Yeah.
Think about their motivations.
And most importantly, trust your gut.
Exactly.
If something feels off, it probably is.
And if you find yourself drawn to cold reading,
Mm-hmm.
it is a skill you can learn.
Right.
You can practice it.
You might even have a hidden talent for it.
Yeah, who knows?
Yeah.
But always use it responsibly.
Yeah.
For good, not for evil.
Right. Let's leave our listeners with a final thought.
Okay.
As you go about your day, just pay attention to how people try to influence you.
Okay.
Whether it's through what they say, their body language, their emotions.
Okay.
Become a student of human behavior.
Right.
You know, a detective of persuasion.
Yeah.
And use your knowledge wisely.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive.
It has.
Really eye-opening.
It's always good to understand how our minds work.
Yeah.
And how they can be influenced.
And on that note, that concludes our deep dive into the world of psychic cold reading.
Thanks for joining us.
We'll see you next time.